Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. On today's episode, I will be demonstrating how to target special regulation rivers or bodies of waters with barbless single hooks on plugs. There will be a timestamp available in the description of the video below. So with that being said, let's get a preface going before starting the episode. Alright ladies and gentlemen, so before I start this episode, I would like to preface this episode real quick with, as this channel grows, I know that there are quite a handful of anglers whom are rather interested in how would you fish plugs, because as many of you guys would know, my longtime subscribers and viewers alike, one of my favorite way to target trout in general in rivers, streams, and such in the Sierras is with these Japanese style plugs. But the problem is there are some rivers, particularly on the East Coast, West Coast, and Pacific Northwest, that do have special regulations. As for the guys that are hailing from like the middle part of America, your state might not have the same kind of regulation, so out of the box, you guys are fine to fish these lures as is. However though, for the guys that are stuck in these, shall I say, much more blue states that have a lot more regulations, there are some modifications that you need to do before taking one of these plugs out and going to fish your regulated rivers. Because for the most part, America is a vast country. Most people don't understand that, especially some of my international viewers, Europeans and East Asian, they don't understand that America is a vast country. From coast to coast, this country is... You could not fish all of its fresh water within a single person's lifetime. So with that being said, I'm going to try and break this episode down into small chunks and segment on why I do things the way I do them. Because around my area, especially up in the Sierras or even around my local Central Valley areas, a lot of the bodies of water we have around here do have some sort and form of special regulations attached to them. So being a responsible angler is a must. That way you just don't catch fish, but also don't catch a citation with the fish. So let's start this episode. So right out of the package, many of these JDM plug, or better known as Japanese domestic market plugs, will typically come with treble hooks. For the most part, many of these treble hooks are really sturdy and ready to fish right off the bat. Some of them even come in the barbless format already for barbless regulation river fishing. This lure I have here, or this plug in particular, is the Megabass flat side. It comes with the Megabass Buddha hooks, light wire, and they're already barbless. The other plug I have here is the Duo Ryuki series. It is probably one of my favorite plugs, especially when I'm fishing the high Sierras or special regulation river. Out of the package, these plugs will all come with treble hooks. Yes, these plugs are barbed. They are very sticky and really great for targeting trout in unregulated bodies of water. They can be fished just as is already. However, in special regulation water, an angler needs to change these hooks out. Now, as for the type of hook an angler should change the treble hooks out to, especially in strict regulations or bodies of water, single hooks are the way to go. However, you should always read the regulations to determine whether or not the body of water is saying plural hooks for one or more hooks, or just hook, meaning you can only put one single hook on. This is my favorite brand, made by Cultiva. The straight offset makes it extremely easy to hook trout, especially if they're picky. The goal here is to match the hook size to the treble hooks that you will be replacing. Now, as for the rigging itself, how should an angler rig the single hooks and replace the treble hooks? Well, in my opinion, my favorite way to rig the single hooks is to have one hook facing outwards towards the tail, which will have the hook points face on top of the plug. This will enable an angler to even hook up on short striking trout in moving water. Now, as for the hook on the belly of the plug, I like to have the hook point facing toward the nose of the plug. This is my preference for rigging my JDM plugs when fishing moving bodies of water. Now, as for the bigger plugs, I like to rig them the same exact way. The biggest difference is when fishing a treble hook versus single hooks, these bigger plugs can be rigged with the hook point all facing the same way toward the nose of the plug as well. You'll have to experiment based on how active your fish are actively striking the lure. The only time I really rig these plugs with all the hook points facing the same direction is when I'm fishing still water. You will have to experiment based on your body of water and how aggressive your fish are for that particular day or session. Now as for the guys with the super regulated waters, if I only have one area to place the hook because the regulation are single hook, I am going to place the single hook at the tail end of the plug. This will enable me to fish the plug very similar to that of a spoon, and it will also let me catch even the finickiest of the bites. As for how do I like to tie on the line to these plugs, I actually like to use a snap. This is a micro snap made by Cultiva, a silent snap. These snaps will make the ergonomic of changing out these plugs a whole lot much easier than having to retie constantly back onto the O-ring. Again, this is my preference. Now as for the kind of line that an angler should be using when plug fishing, especially with these JDM plugs, I really like to use this Preface Super Trout Advanced PE line. Now what is PE line? PE line is polyethylene line. This is a 4-strand braid, making it extremely thin and really well suited for bait finesse gear, especially bait finesse casting gear. However, when I'm targeting bigger rivers, especially those rivers where there are potential to catch bigger trout, I will fish much heavier PE line. When I'm buying PE line, I am not buying it based on breaking strength, I am buying it based on diameter. This is an 8-strand braid, and this is the most versatile in my opinion all around braid, whether I'm fishing this loaded on a bait finesse casting reel or a light tackle spinning reel. This is my preferred all around. Now as for the good old mono. When do I fish mono? I like to fish mono in unregulated sections because it is cheap and it is easy to spool up. It is also very great for pinning trout when fishing with treble hooks. Now as for what plug will I fish with what line? When I'm fishing treble hooks, even barbless treble hooks, I will fish them exclusively on monofilament. Mono will give me that light delay for the trout to completely absorb the treble hooks. However, when I am fishing single hooks, I am going to fish this on a braid to fluorocarbon leader combo, because I will often more times than not only have one chance to set the hook on the trout. With the single hooks, it is very important to not have any delay or stretch and get the hook set immediately. So this is my preference on how I would like to fish these plugs. For the fluorocarbon leader, I really like Sunline. I like this FC leader material, and again, as I've mentioned already, when I buy line, I really don't buy it based on breaking strength. I buy it based on diameter because I want my leader to exit the guides of the bait finesse rods or my rod guides smoothly. With this little salmonid model, I'm going to demonstrate in theory how these plugs would work with their designated hooks. The easiest hooks out of the package will be the treble hooks. These treble hooks, when a fish attacks this plug, will often hook it on the bottom of the lip if the fish is not aggressive. However, if the fish were to be extremely aggressive, these treble hooks can cause major damage if the fish were particularly aggressive, often hooking it around the gill plate, nose, and eyeballs. Now with the purpose of the single hook, if a fish were to be non-aggressive and tries to swipe, the single hook will often grab the fish around the corner of the mouth or around the top of the mouth. If the fish were extremely aggressive and tries to grab the bait on the belly, it will end up getting hooked on the bottom jaw, allowing the secondary hooks from the tail to recurve and hook the fish inside of the jaw. This is the theory behind the single hook. However, it will all depend on how aggressive your fish are based on the season or even the body of water you are fishing. Now as for these bigger plugs, when it comes down to fishing just the one single hook, I will fish this on the tail end, because more times than not, if the fish were to be aggressive and it grabs the middle of the plug can often slide down and the fish can still end up getting hooked on top of the jaw with the hook at the tail end of the plug. This is how I prefer to fish it if I were to be fishing it just with a single hook setup. This is important mostly just for the Pacific Northwest guys, where you guys are limited to the single hook body of waters. Alright, so now with the summary and the basics out of the way, I will be targeting the Truckee River. This particular stretch on the Truckee River will have special regulation. So with that being said, the preferred tackle I will be fishing today will be my Shimano Trout 1 Native Special. I will be fishing this on bait finesse tackle because I really like the line control given with these bait finesse casters. Unlike a spinning rod, bait finesse casters will have much better line control when targeting trout with single hooks. I ended up getting bit, and this wasn't a big fish by any metric or standard, but a nice little native brown trout. When it comes down to plug fishing can be quite effective in taking a multitude size of trout in these wild waters. I'll show this nice little wild trout to you guys real quick. This is a very small brown trout, and with the barbless hooks, it just pops right out. He's full fin, full of colors, and off you go, little guy. I am not a trophy fisherman, so I am out here just targeting whatever that will take this plug for the day. Whether it be a 5-inch trout or a 5-pound trout, I could care less. The goal is to cast this plug upstream and sweep it very similar to that of a spoon. I ended up getting bit, and as a testament to whether or not these single hooks do have a great hookup ratio, yes they do. It all comes down to the angler, and this little tiny rainbow trout somehow managed to hook himself on the tail end of the hook. He's not big by any metric or standard, but very pretty nonetheless. I'll show him to you guys real quick, and off he goes. As for the question itself of whether or not an angler will lose fish on barbless hooks, yes, an angler will lose fish on barbless hooks. I am going to show you guys a bite that despite doing everything right, I ended up losing this nice little brown trout. This trout ended up striking really close to me, and despite having a fluorocarbon leader and a non-stretch braid, I still ended up losing him. It is part of fishing with barbless hooks. After losing that fish, I ended up seeing another fish that was also tailing that fish, so I ended up getting bit again, and this wasn't a really big fish, but nonetheless, it was a fish, and I ended up hooking this fish really well, despite it swiping at the lure multiple times. This fish ended up getting hooked at the nose end, and he popped right off. He's a tiny little brown trout, but one day he will be a giant, eating the other rainbow trout and cutthroat trout. So I'll show him to you guys real quick, and off he goes. On the topic of fishing these barbless hooks, I will often lose some fish and I will land some fish. It is all part of the game. Despite an angler doing everything right, sometimes it really comes down to the luck of the draw. This fish in particular, I ended up getting bit as I was hanging this plug at the end of the swing. I ended up hooking into this fish literally underneath the rod tip, but I still ended up losing him. Again, with these barbless hooks, an angler will lose some and will often land some. Now as for the anglers who claim they never lose any fish on barbless hooks, they are lying. More times than not, when I'm fishing barbless hooks, I will land maybe about 3/4 of the fish that I've ever hooked into, and I will lose a large portion, about 1/4 of the fish that I'll ever hook into on those days. This was a nice little rainbow trout. He's not big, but very pretty and full of colors. Alright little guy, thanks for playing, and off you go. Now as for this particular situation, I ended up spotting a trout that was hanging underneath this overhang. I'm going to try and sweep the plug directly in front of him and see if he bites, and ultimately he did end up taking the plug. I hooked him very well, but for some strange reason, the GoPro ended up cutting out. I landed this fish, and he's not big, but a nice little native rainbow. Off you go as well. Now I'm going to talk about a really controversial topic. Why should an angler fish barbless hooks in the first place? Well, in my opinion, it all comes down to regulation. If the regulation demands it, I don't mind fishing barbless hooks. However, if there are no regulations and the regulations are open, like many parts of the Sierras, I have no problem fishing a treble hook either. I ended up getting bit, and this little rainbow was ultra aggressive. He ended up getting hooked on the belly of the plug, and I'll show him to you guys real quick before returning him back into the water. In my opinion, I have no problem fishing with treble hooks because at the end of the day, as an angler, we are all sticking hooks into fish. There are casualties that are bound to happen. I ended up getting bit, but somehow I lost this fish. So as for the reason why I don't mind fishing with treble hooks, but will fish with single hooks where it is demanded, is because barbless hooks don't exactly guarantee a fish survival either. There are a lot of factors that are out there in whether or not a fish will survive after release, so that's just my opinion on the matter of whether or not to fish a single barbless versus a treble hook barbless. I ended up getting bit, and this was a much nicer little native rainbow trout. This fish was quite aggressive, but the hook just popped right out of the plugs as I got him into the net. I'll show him to you guys real quick. He is full fin, full of colors, and these native are gorgeous in my opinion. Alright buddy, off you go. Hopefully today's episode demonstrate my take on how to fish these barbless single hooks on these JDM plugs. In the past I've demonstrated how to fish these plugs, but never with the barbless single hooks completely or thoroughly. So I ended up getting bit, and this was a nice little rainbow trout, but somehow the GoPro camera ended up cutting off. But I did land this fish, and I'll show him to you guys real quick before returning him back to the water. Overall, it was just a great day out on the water. I didn't catch a really big fish, but that's okay. I'm not a trophy fisherman, so I'm just happy to catch whatever that comes along my way. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, tight lines y'all.